Don't step inside. Get out of here now. Rosa, the housekeeper, rushed toward me and grabbed my arm just as I set foot on my daughter's front steps. Her face had gone pale, as if she'd just seen death itself. I froze, my heart pounding, unable to understand what was happening in the very house I had once helped my daughter pay half the mortgage for. I opened my mouth to ask, but she backed away, glancing toward the door as though terrified someone might hear. If you stay here one more minute, you won't have a chance to walk out of this place. I stepped back toward my car, but instead of leaving, I turned off the lights, lowered my seat, and watched. And then, what I saw through the dining room window made everything inside me collapse. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Caroline Mercer, and I'm 57 years old. Just a few hours before hearing that terrifying warning, I had believed today would be the best day I'd had in an entire year. A long, agonizing year of silence, unanswered calls, messages slipping into the void like pain tossed into a dark sky. It all began with a text message, one short line that shattered every bit of emotional armor I'd built over the past year. Mom, can we have dinner together next Thursday? I miss you. Grace, my only daughter, the child who used to hug me every night, who once said I was the best friend in the world, who cried when she left for college, yet suddenly disappeared from my life one day as if I had never existed. No argument, no clear reason, just distance widening day after day, unread messages, declined calls. Layer after layer, my daughter slowly slipped from my hands into a world I could no longer reach. A world where Landon Reeves, her husband, controlled every door. And yet that day, my phone buzzed, and with one message, all the pain and hope rushed back into me in the cruelest way. I read that message dozens of times, each time my heart beat harder. I told myself, maybe she really misses me. Maybe she finally realized her mother never did anything wrong. Maybe everything can start over. So I prepared. Too much, honestly, for an ordinary dinner. I changed clothes 5 times, checked the mirror a dozen more. I decided to wear the light blue sweater Grace gave me 3 years ago. The last Christmas, we were truly mother and daughter. Driving into Grace's upscale neighborhood, Snow Pine Estates on the outskirts of Denver, my heart fluttered like a woman on her first date in decades. But the moment I parked, I sensed something was off. The front yard was bare, no longer filled with the hydrangeas we planted together when Grace first moved in. The porch light was dimmer than usual. There was no sense of home, no warmth at all, only a cold emptiness like a frozen lake. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my wind-tousled hair, and took a deep breath to steady myself. I was about to attend our first reconciliation dinner after a year of estrangement. I had rehearsed a simple line for days. "Grace, I'm glad you texted me." But before I could use it, Rosa came running. Her sudden yank nearly knocked me off balance. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven. I had never seen her like this. Rosa was always calm, gentle, someone who cared for Grace as if she were her own child. What she said wasn't just a warning. It was a plea. When she rushed back inside, her shoulders shaking as though afraid of being seen, a cold shiver ran the length of my spine. I returned to my car, shut the door, and locked it. But instead of driving away, I turned off all the lights, slid low in my seat, and peered through the narrow gap where the curtains didn't cover the window. At first, nothing. The house was dark, unnervingly still. But then, almost as if someone had waited for me to leave, lights flickered on room by room. each window lit up like the opening scene of a carefully staged play. A man in a black suit appeared in the dining room, then a woman holding a folder, and then Landon walked in. One glance was enough to recognize that arrogant stride. He talked on the phone, pacing like he was leading a strategic briefing, but the cruelest part had yet to come. Grace stepped inside moments later. My daughter, her face unrecognizable, no smile, no warmth, only a chilling emptiness. She looked at the stack of papers on the table and signed them. No hesitation, no doubt. My heart clenched painfully, a year of absolute silence from her, no explanation, and now, signing documents? For whom? For what purpose? Was I dreaming? I leaned forward against the steering wheel, fighting the urge to sob. A familiar instinct suddenly surged back, one I thought I had buried long ago. The instinct of someone who spent 15 years living inside a violent marriage. Someone who had learned to sense danger the moment it entered the room. That instinct was screaming inside my head now. This wasn't a reconciliation dinner. This wasn't a daughter reaching out. This wasn't healing. This was a plan, a private meeting. And strangely, it had only started once I supposedly left, but I hadn't left. I was still there, and Landon looked straight toward me. I ducked down reflexively, my heart pounding like a drum. When I glanced again seconds later, the curtains had been pulled shut. The house vanished behind thick gray fabric, as if they knew I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't sit there anymore. I started the engine and drove away, my hands trembling so hard I struggled to keep the wheel steady. But leaving that house didn't bring relief. If anything, as the streetlights blurred into streaks of white outside my window, I realized I had just stepped into the biggest storm of my life. And one question stabbed through my mind over and over: was Grace being coerced? Or was my own daughter silently participating in a scheme against me? I drove away from Grace's neighborhood in a daze, as if everything I had just witnessed were a nightmare that hadn't finished unfolding. It wasn't until the glow of a gas station appeared on the right that I finally pulled in. I parked, lowered the window to let the night air in, hoping it would loosen the tightness in my chest. The smell of gasoline, the hiss of automated doors, the harsh white lights, all painfully ordinary. Meanwhile, I was shaking, trying to piece together what I'd just seen into something that made sense. I placed both hands on the wheel, but they wouldn't stop trembling. The air in the car felt heavy, almost suffocating. I tried recalling Grace's expression as she signed those papers. Cold, hollow. Not the face of the daughter I raised for more than 20 years. Not the child who once gave me a Mother's Day card with trembling handwriting. Mom, you are my safe place. Tears threatened, but my throat locked tight. My phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. It's me, Rosa. Don't go back to the house. Don't tell anyone. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the cafe inside the central station. Important. The word important sent a chill through me. I read it again, then tucked my phone inside the chest pocket of my jacket, afraid it might vanish if I put it anywhere else. Driving home, every street sign, every familiar corner felt strangely distant. I unlocked my apartment, stepped into my quiet living room, yet the unease followed me inside like a shadow. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair by the window, staring at the city lights. Skyscrapers glowing gold, cars moving slowly along the freeway, lives continuing as usual while mine felt like it had been yanked off its axis. I imagined countless scenarios: Grace being pressured, Grace being deceived, or Grace truly believing the things Landon had told her. That possibility hurt more than my divorce ever did. I could recognize violence. I could fight against lies. But my own daughter believing I was toxic, that was a wound with no bandage. I remembered her freshman year of college, a whole week without calling. When I visited unannounced, she hugged me and cried from academic stress. A simple touch from me eased her breathing. But after she married Landon, everything changed. At first, subtly, vague excuses Grace made. We're busy. It's not a good time to talk. I'm just living my own life, Mom. I didn't realize it then, but each line was a step away from me. The day Grace got married, she looked beautiful, glowing, and Landon never let go of her waist, gripping her like he owned her. I didn't like that hand from the start. It was too tight, too possessive. But I told myself, Caroline, don't judge. He's the man your daughter loves. A year later, Grace was visibly thinner. Her close friends drifted away. My calls grew shorter, whispers from her that she was tired, that she was fine, and don't worry. But her voice said otherwise. Now looking back, every sign was painfully obvious. The next day, I met Rosa at the Central Bus Station Cafe, a crowded place where no one noticed anyone else. I arrived 20 minutes early, sitting near the window, watching people hurry by. My hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I couldn't drink. Rosa arrived exactly at noon. She wore a knit hat and a dark scarf, her small frame tense as her eyes darted around the room. When she spotted me, her shoulders sagged with relief. She sat down and took my hands. Mrs. Mercer, I'm so sorry I didn't speak sooner. I didn't have time to respond before she lowered her voice, scanning the room again. Mr. Landon controls everything, every meal, every call, every person Grace is allowed to meet, even what she thinks. My eyes widened. Rosa explained it piece by piece. How Landon dictated Grace's diet, forcing her to stay on harsh regimens though she was already slim. How he checked her phone every morning. How he insisted she sleep 8 hours, not for her health, but to keep her from seeing anyone. And worst of all, he convinced her you're the problem, that you want to ruin their life, that you're jealous. I clenched my fist, trying to keep my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was being beaten from the inside. Grace believes that? Rosa looked down. She doesn't know what to believe anymore. Everything she hears comes from one person. A long, uncomfortable silence followed. I heard rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, a crying child, all muffled, like they belonged to a world far from mine. Then Rosa said the words that shattered me. He needs your signature. For the old house. For the shares her father left her. He said once he gets your signature, everything will be done. The room tilted. I gripped the table so I wouldn't fall. But Rosa wasn't finished. Her voice shook now. Yesterday, I overheard them. That dinner wasn't about reconciliation. They planned to create an accident so you wouldn't be able to interfere. I looked into Rosa's frightened eyes, and all I could think about was Grace. Grace, my daughter. Grace, the child who held my hand on the first day of school. Grace, who once believed no one loved her more than her mother. Did she know? Was she being coerced? Or had she been manipulated into believing my death would make her life easier? I couldn't breathe. I had to inhale deeply 3 times just to stop myself from crying out in pain. The room blurred like someone had splashed water across a painting. One thing became painfully clear. If I didn't act, I would lose my daughter. Forever. Rosa opened her bag and pulled out a thick envelope wrapped in 2 layers of paper. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. I opened it and the first thing I saw was a stack of documents bearing my signature. My signature, but not mine. The loops were too long, the ending stroke dragged out. One glance and I knew they were forged. "There are also ones with Miss Grace's," Rosa whispered. I turned the pages. Grace's signatures looked disturbingly real, but I knew my daughter's handwriting. She always tilted the G slightly upward, writing quickly and neatly. These signatures were slow, cautious, copied strokes. A small audio recorder slid out of the envelope. I pressed play, my hand gripping the table. Landon's voice, low, calculated. "All we need is her signature. Grace's mother won't question anything if it all looks natural. We can't let her get in the way." Rosa swallowed hard. I heard it while taking the trash out behind the yard. I couldn't speak anymore. Not because I was shocked, but because I was holding myself together so I wouldn't fall apart in public. Part of me wanted to run, grab Grace and drag her away from that man. But the part of me that survived 15 years of abuse knew impulsiveness would only make us both targets. "We could take this to the police," Rosa whispered, almost pleading. I met her eyes. "We can't. Not yet." Landon had wide connections in the city. He wasn't famous, but his father had once been chairman of the local Chamber of Commerce, a man with significant influence. A formal report could be diluted or, worse, turned into evidence against me. If I handed over what Rosa gave me to the police right now, there was a high chance I'd be labeled as a family disruptor before anyone bothered to look at the truth. I needed someone I could trust, and only one name came to mind: Harold Bishop, an old friend from college, now an attorney specializing in asset disputes and fraud. Harold was a quiet, straightforward man, and most importantly, he had no ties whatsoever to Landon's family. Right there in the cafe, I called Harold. His voice came through after 2 rings. "Caroline, it's been years. Are you all right?" "No, Harold, I think I'm in danger." The moment I said it out loud, my throat tightened. I had never spoken those words before. And once I did, the fear stopped being hypothetical and became real. I briefly explained what Rosa had revealed. Harold fell silent for a long moment, the only sound being the rustle of papers in his office. Then he said, "Listen to me carefully. Your old documents, the ones related to your previous home and the shares your late husband left, where are they?" "In a green folder, inside the safe under my desk." Harold lowered his voice, so serious it sent a shiver through me. "That is the only evidence protecting you right now. And Caroline, do not go home alone. I'm coming to meet you. Do not hang up." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. After we ended the call, I thanked Rosa and told her to go home using different routes to avoid anyone tracing our meeting. I left the central station feeling as if I were walking between 2 worlds. The world I once knew, peaceful, stable, and the world of shadows slowly swallowing me. By the time my car stopped in front of my apartment, Harold was already there waiting, but he wasn't standing normally. He was pressed against the doorframe, staring at me with a face nearly drained of color. "Caroline, your apartment was ransacked." My knees nearly gave out. We walked in together. The door hadn't been forced. Someone had either used a key or knew how to work the smart lock without leaving a trace. Inside was a scene I never imagined I would witness in my own life. The safe under my desk was wide open, drawers pulled out, papers scattered as if someone had been searching for something valuable. But the only thing missing was the green folder. I held my head in my hands, standing in the middle of the wrecked living room. Harold handed me a glass of water, speaking in a calming voice. "You need to stay composed. Someone knew you kept those documents, but they don't know I made partial copies earlier. I'll send them to you immediately." I stared at him, stunned. How did they know? Harold didn't hesitate. Grace didn't tell him, but Landon could guess. He's smart enough to understand that you would always hold on to evidence related to your and your daughter's assets. I barely had time to process his words when my phone rang. It was the library where I worked part-time. "Ms. Mercer, we just received an anonymous report accusing you of financial misconduct while overseeing the library's donation fund." My legs went weak. I almost dropped the phone. I've never done that," I stammered. "We know, but by policy, we must place you on temporary suspension while we investigate." I hung up and looked at Harold with a face drained of expression. "Caroline," he said slowly, "they're building a narrative that you are unstable, greedy, and dishonest. By the time you report them, no one will believe you." I couldn't find words. I felt myself being pushed into a corner by an invisible but powerful hand. Landon's hand. The phone buzzed again. A message from Rosa. "They mentioned Plan B. It's not just about the assets. It's about Grace." My head felt like it exploded. I read it over and over, each word cutting into my skin. Plan B, not me, but Grace. I looked at Harold, my voice trembling uncontrollably. Where do they plan to take Grace? Harold looked at me carefully, choosing his words. "Caroline, I've heard Landon has financial dealings with an overseas partner. If he gets Grace out of the country before you act, we won't be able to find her again." The room spun. My breathing seized. On one hand, I knew that if I stayed involved, my life could be in danger. On the other hand, if I did nothing, Grace would disappear from my life forever. In that moment, I knew I had only two choices: run to save myself or fight, even if it meant risking everything. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had survived domestic violence. I had rebuilt my life from nothing. I was not giving up this time, not when my daughter was being swallowed by darkness. I left my ransacked apartment that very night without packing clothes or taking anything familiar. Harold told me to drive straight to my cousin's house in the Santa Fe area, a remote place, quiet, and most importantly, unknown to anyone connected to Landon. As I drove, the low mountain ranges appeared under the pale moonlight, stretching like a fragile curtain between me and the world Landon was trying to control. When I arrived, my cousin Sylvia's small wooden house stood beneath an old birch tree. The warm porch light nearly brought me to tears. I had grown used to feeling hunted, but being greeted by someone, even a distant relative, reminded me I still had places where I belonged. Sylvia looked me over and asked just one gentle question. "How long?" "A few days," I said softly. "Maybe longer." She nodded immediately, as if she had always expected something like this. "You're safe here. Rest. Talk tomorrow." But I knew I couldn't sleep. After a bowl of warm soup, I sat alone at the small wooden table by the window, replaying the audio files and examining each forged document Rosa had given me. Signatures, fake transfers, carefully fabricated records so precise they made my skin crawl. In that quiet Santa Fe room, I finally saw the situation from enough distance to understand that this wasn't just a broken family matter. It was an orchestrated plan, structured and deliberate, crafted by a man skilled in manipulation. The next morning, Harold arrived in Santa Fe. With him were two people he said would become critical allies: Troy Callahan, a retired detective who had handled domestic abuse cases, and Dr. Evelyn Moore, a specialist in coercive control and trauma bonding. From the moment I saw them, I knew I was no longer facing this storm alone. Troy entered with the presence of a man who had seen far too much darkness, but still carried compassion in his eyes. He didn't shake my hand. He simply looked at me and said, "Mrs. Mercer, I've heard everything, and I want you to understand something right now. You're not imagining this. It's real." That sentence alone eased half my burden. Evelyn was different, gentle, grounded, with eyes that seemed to read through every defense. When I described how Grace changed, her weight loss, her fear of answering the phone, her avoidance of friends, her constant anxiety, Evelyn nodded as if hearing a familiar story. "That's coercive control," she explained. "Not physical abuse, but far more damaging. The victim loses willpower, loses the ability to distinguish truth from manipulation, and becomes completely dependent on the abuser." I clenched my hands. But Grace is smart. She's been strong since she was little. Evelyn placed her hand on the table and said firmly, "Intelligence doesn't shield anyone from a skilled manipulator. In fact, intelligent people are often targeted because they know how to endure, rationalize, and silence their own doubts." A heavy silence filled the room. Troy stood up, arms crossed. "If Landon is preparing to take Grace out of the country, we don't have much time." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "If he crosses a border with her, no one can demand extradition. Without evidence, without legal jurisdiction, she'll disappear from the United States and from your life." I felt myself turn to stone. I had feared it, but hearing it aloud made it undeniable. Harold spread a map on the table. "We need a plan. We can't wait for him to move first." I looked at these three people, strangers technically, giving their time, expertise, and safety for me and for a young woman they'd never met. Gratitude nearly overwhelmed me. Troy outlined the plan. His only weak point is his work schedule. Landon travels once a month. If we know his next trip, we get a window of a few hours. The only time Grace won't be monitored closely. I remembered Rosa's words. "He's flying to Phoenix next week. Board meeting." Troy circled the date. "Good. That's when we move." But the tasks ahead were daunting. Rosa would monitor the inside and alert us when Landon left. Harold would handle legal preparation and federal contact if needed. Troy would secure the home and guide the extraction. Evelyn would make first contact with Grace, easing her panic and helping her see the truth. When Evelyn described her role, I asked, "Will Grace trust you?" Evelyn gave a sad, soft smile. "Trust isn't required. What matters is breaking the mental loop he built. A few minutes without him in the room can create an opening." On paper, the plan looked simple. In reality, we all knew one mistake could ruin everything. I swallowed hard. What if we fail? Troy didn't hesitate. Failure isn't an option. We're rescuing someone trapped in a violent dynamic. We won't let anyone get dragged out of this country like property. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. "Caroline, when we step in, we're not just helping you. We're saving a life." That sentence made my knees weak. Grace, my baby, the child I held in my arms when she was 3 days old, now needed a rescue like a hostage. Evelyn looked at me. "Prepare yourself emotionally. When we find Grace, she might resist. She might blame you or deny everything. That's normal when a victim is separated from their controller." I inhaled deeply. As long as she's alive, I can endure anything. After they left to prepare, I remained on Sylvia's porch, watching the Santa Fe sky dim behind the hills. The air was peaceful, yet I felt the weight of how narrowly I stood between saving my daughter and losing her forever. That night, Sylvia placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Don't fall apart, Carolyn. I know you. You don't give up." Later, I stepped outside into the cold night air. The wind smelled faintly of distant snow. I looked toward Denver, toward Grace, and whispered into the dark, "Grace, I'm coming. Don't be afraid. Don't let go. I will get you out of there, whatever it takes." And just like that, the countdown to the biggest battle of my life began. Rosa messaged exactly as promised. "He's gone. 11:02. Took luggage. House alarm disabled. Now or never." I stared at the message, my hands cold as metal in winter. In the driver's seat, Troy gave a single nod, sharp, decisive, then looked back at Harold and Evelyn. Everyone was ready. Only I had to steady my breath. We parked 3 houses away from the gated entrance. From there, the steel fence, guard booth, and cameras of North Ridge Estates looked like the front of a fortress. But Troy knew how to neutralize intimidation. He put on a UPS delivery uniform Harold had prepared, plus a cap pulled low. He held an empty cardboard box labeled fragile. 15 years in law enforcement had taught him one thing. Sometimes the best way into a secure place was to look utterly harmless. "Stay calm," Troy whispered before stepping out. "We get one chance, but don't worry, I've gotten into places much harder than this." He walked to the gate. The camera scanned him. The guard glanced at the box, pressed a button, and opened the gate as if on autopilot. No questions asked. The gate opened, and the plan began. Troy walked deeper into the neighborhood, and our car followed the internal route unnoticed. Approaching the 3rd house on the right, Grace's, we slowed, stopping under a large tree that hid us from the entrance cameras. As promised, Rosa had left the back door slightly ajar. The curtain flickered gently in the breeze, like a silent plea. When we stepped inside, I sensed immediately the wrong kind of quiet. Not the peace of an empty home, but the heavy silence of a place where life had been stripped away and replaced with control. Nothing was out of place. Not a cushion. Not a single item left casually on a table. No smell of food, no background TV noise. Nothing indicating that Grace had been allowed to live as a normal human being. Rosa emerged from the hallway, pale and signaling us to stay silent. "She's in the living room. Her spirit is almost gone." We walked toward the living room doorway. I stepped in first, and my heart nearly dropped to the floor. Grace curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket even though the house was warm. Her once soft hair was tangled and flat, as if life had drained out of it. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken and vacant. My daughter, who used to love jogging every morning, who used to smile brightly after yoga class, now looked as if she had survived a storm that had lasted an entire year. I stepped inside. "Grace?" She lifted her head, and panic flooded her eyes instantly. "Mom, you can't be here!" Her voice cracked like shattering glass. "If he finds out, you have to leave now. You don't understand. You can't be here." I didn't even have time to speak before Evelyn stepped forward softly, her voice like a gentle cloth draped over Grace's terror. "Grace, I'm Evelyn. No one is here to cause trouble. We're here to help, to protect you." Grace looked around, her eyes darting between us, as if desperately trying to decide who was a threat. It was the look of someone who had been controlled for so long that she no longer knew how to distinguish safety from danger. I sat down 2 steps away from her, not any closer. Evelyn said Grace needed space, not pressure. I gently took out my phone and opened the message I had received the day before. the message she sent, inviting me to dinner. "Grace," I said, showing her the screen, "this message, did you actually write it?" She stared at the screen, squinting, then slowly shook her head, not to deny me, but as if trying to remember something. "I didn't write this." Her voice was so soft I had to lean in to hear it. That single sentence made my heart tighten. Harold continued. He opened his briefcase and took out the photos Rosa had captured, the forged transfer documents with fake signatures of me and Grace. "If you had signed these, you would remember," Harold said as gently as possible. "But this signature isn't yours." And then I saw what I feared most, and also what I hoped for most. Grace's hand began to tremble, not from anger, not from resenting me, but from fear, and from realizing something was wrong. "No, that's impossible," Grace whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Rosa slowly stepped forward from behind the door, her eyes filled with pain as she looked at Grace. "Ms. Grace, I heard him talking about an accident for your mother, a fall down the stairs, red wine, something that would look natural." Grace jerked her head up. "No, he wouldn't, he's not like that." The word shot out like a spring, reflexively defending Landon, but her eyes no longer matched her voice. I looked straight at my daughter. I didn't accuse her. I didn't judge her. I simply asked, with all the ache inside me, "Grace, do you trust him more than your own mother?" A simple question, but enough to create the first crack in the wall Landon had built around her mind. Grace grabbed her head as if our words were fighting inside her skull. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice a soft thread wrapping around Grace's frayed spirit. "What you're feeling right now, confusion, fear, not knowing who to trust, it's the clearest sign of psychological control. When you stop trusting yourself, when you stop trusting your own memories, it's because someone has taken that away from you." Tears began to fall down Grace's cheeks, first slowly, then all at once, like a dam breaking. I thought he loved me," she choked out. "I thought he wanted what was best for me." I couldn't stay back anymore. I took one step toward her, each step feeling like walking through fire. "Grace, I once believed the same thing about your father." My voice shook, and it took me years to escape. Grace looked up at me, really looked, for the first time in months. "Mom?" Just one word, but inside it was confusion, hurt, realization, and despair. Harold set the forged documents on the table. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on Grace's shoulder. Rosa stood behind her, nodding, affirming everything Grace was terrified to admit. And then, the moment I had waited for over a year finally came. Grace inhaled shakily, her eyes red but clearer now, no longer cloudy with fear. She looked at me, directly, without avoiding, without flinching. Her voice was hoarse but firm. "Mom, I want to leave." No alarm blared, no door slammed, no sound intruded on that moment, just a mother and her daughter. And for the first time in a long, painful year, I saw light return to her eyes. And I knew this was only the first step, but it was the most important one. The step that brought my daughter back to herself. Troy checked his watch, then looked at me and Evelyn, his voice low but sharp. "We have to go now. He's due for a check-in. If Landon calls and Grace doesn't answer, or if her voice sounds off, he'll turn around immediately." Grace flinched, clutching the blanket around her like a fragile shield. Her breathing sped up, her hands squeezed together until her knuckles went white. Fear had rooted so deeply in her body that just hearing Landon's name sent her trembling. Rosa rushed to the kitchen, grabbed the phone Landon forced Grace to carry 24/7. She powered it off, removed the SIM, and handed it to Troy. "He uses tracking software," Rosa whispered. "I'm not sure turning it off is enough, but at least he can't follow the signal." Troy nodded and slipped the SIM into his pocket. No trace left behind. "Let's go." Everything happened in seconds, but to me it felt like a lifetime. I put a coat on Grace, held her hand, and guided her toward the back door. Every step felt like stepping onto thin ice. I feared the creak of a floorboard, the squeak of a hinge, even the whisper of the wind. Evelyn stayed close, her hand on Grace's back to steady her breath. When we reached the yard, Troy scanned the surroundings. The garden was washed in pale afternoon light. No movement, no suspicious sound, only Grace's shaky breathing and my pounding heart. "Go," he whispered. We crossed the yard, slipping through the side path toward the back alley. Harold's black SUV waited under the shade of a large tree, engine humming softly. I opened the back door and helped Grace in. She trembled so violently she clutched my shoulders and asked 3 times, "Is he coming? Does he know? Can he see us?" I stroked her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're leaving safely." But my own heart was racing just as fast. When Harold pressed the gas, the car rolled forward, pulling us away from the house where my daughter had lived in fear for months. Troy reclined slightly, watching the rearview mirror nonstop. By the time we approached the community gate, my pulse was a drum inside my throat. The guard stood in the road, phone in hand, his face tense. As we drove past, he spoke quickly into the phone. "Yes, I'm checking. Let me review the rear cameras." Harold accelerated just as the guard looked up. But because our license plate belonged to Harold's law firm, which frequently entered the community, he didn't question it. We passed through. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, but relief lasted only 5 seconds. Rosa's phone rang. The piercing sound exploded inside the silent car. Rosa glanced at the screen, her lips paling. "It's him." No one spoke. Only the hum of the engine filled the space. Rosa answered, switching to low speaker mode as planned. "Yes, sir? I'm at the market. Is something—" Landon's scream was so loud I flinched. "Someone broke into the house! The back door was unlocked! What are you hiding? Where's Grace?" Grace clamped her hands over her ears, curling into a tight ball. Troy motioned for Harold to go faster. Evelyn put her arm around Grace to keep her from collapsing. "Sir, I wasn't there. I just stepped out to shop," Rosa said, trembling. "Don't lie to me," he roared. "I'm coming back now. If anything has happened, you know the consequences." Rosa swallowed hard. "I don't know anything, sir." The call cut abruptly. No goodbye, no warning, just dead silence. In that moment, I understood one thing. We had won the first round, but he had just realized he'd lost control, and that would make him more dangerous than ever. Grace broke into sobs, not from relief, but from the panic triggered by his voice, a voice she had lived under for far too long. "He'll find me," Grace whispered. "He always finds me." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her whole body shaking. "No, Grace, not anymore. You're going far away from him now." Troy turned toward the back seat, his voice firm. "You're safe. I promise. I've dealt with men like him, and I know how to stop them." But Evelyn added softly, not to frighten Grace, but to prepare me. "Caroline, I must tell you something. The period right after a victim escapes is the most dangerous phase. This is when the abuser has lost all control, and they become unpredictable. He could turn into a maniac. Very hard to anticipate." I squeezed Grace's hand tighter, my own heart clenching. No matter what he does, I whispered into her hair, I won't let him touch you again. We drove into the outskirts where the city faded into lonely hills and old wooden fences. After nearly an hour, Harold turned onto a dirt path leading to Troy's family ranch. No one will find this place, Troy said. No GPS, poor signal, no neighbors close enough to see anything. Only my family ever knew about it. And they're gone. The old wooden house appeared in the open field, its roof weathered, its porch overlooking distant mountains. It was peacefully quiet, almost too quiet. We stopped. No one moved for several seconds, as if all of us needed time to come down from the rush of escape. I helped Grace out of the car. The crisp air made her cough faintly. Then she looked around, her expression still frantic but no longer overwhelmed by panic. Evelyn rested a hand on my shoulder. You just pulled your daughter out of the hands of a dangerous man, but the journey isn't over. This is Grace's most fragile stage, and the stage when he will be most desperate to pull her back. Troy checked the doors, locked every entry, drew the curtains, and shut off all lights that could be seen from outside. He moved with the precision of someone who had spent years keeping people alive. Grace sat on the old wool-covered sofa. I took her hand, cold, fragile, almost weightless. "Mom, do you think he'll come here?" she whispered. I kissed her hair, my voice breaking. "No, he won't find this place, and I won't let him come near you ever again." Grace finally cried, truly cried, for the first time since we'd entered her house earlier that day. No more automatic apologies for Landon, no more terrified whispers, just the sobs of someone who had finally stepped out of the invisible cage. I held her as our tears blended, and I vowed with everything left in me that I would protect her to the very end. I didn't know how many hours had passed since we reached Troy's ranch. The afternoon light had vanished. Darkness spread across the land. Yet inside the wooden house, the warm glow of the lamps still couldn't calm the storm inside my daughter. Grace stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the pitch-dark field as if Landon could emerge from it at any moment. She flinched at every noise, a branch scraping the roof, the wind squeezing through the cracks. Her whole body was strung tight, ready to snap. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her shaking legs betrayed her. Evelyn stepped close, gently placing her hand on Grace's back. "Breathe in slowly. Count to 4, then exhale gently." Grace followed the instructions, but her breath broke into weak, uneven fragments like a torn float barely clinging to the surface of the water. "I'm scared. He'll know I ran," she whispered, trembling. "He always knows. Everything. Mom, will he find me?" I stepped closer, placing my hand over her shaking one, gripping it just firmly enough to remind her she was still in the present, not trapped in that house where she had been held by invisible chains. "No one knows we're here," I said. "No one except the people we trust completely." But Grace couldn't hear my words with her heart. She was still living inside the wound, inside the reflexes carved into her after years of control. Evelyn signaled for Troy to pull the curtains shut. The room became sealed off, safer. The warm light formed a small circle in the darkness, a circle where Grace could finally breathe without feeling watched. "Drink some water," Evelyn said gently. "Your body is reacting to long-term stress. Water will help you settle." Grace held the glass with both hands, sipping it the way someone leaving a desert would. After a few minutes, she sat on the sofa, curling into herself as though she were afraid of taking up too much space. Evelyn sat an appropriate distance away, not too close to pressure her, not too far to make her feel abandoned. Grace, Evelyn began, her voice soft like a low piano note. When was the last time you felt truly happy? Grace was silent for a long time. I thought she wouldn't answer. Then suddenly, a sob rose from her chest. It was before I married him. She spoke between choked breaths and tears spilled, as if that question had unlocked a door she had kept sealed for years. I felt something inside me fracture. Grace had never told me anything. She always smiled in the photos she sent, always said, "I'm fine," always reassured me, "Don't worry." But her smiles, it turned out, were only masks. Evelyn nodded gently, letting Grace walk toward the truth at her own pace. Back then, Grace swallowed her tears. I wanted a family. I thought he understood me. But after we married, everything changed. She wiped her cheeks, but the tears kept coming. He said I was fat, said I dressed like a child, said I didn't know how to talk. He checked my phone every night. Said I didn't need friends. Said I didn't need you. My heart clenched when she reached that last word. Evelyn asked softly, "When did you first realize you weren't free?" "When I wanted to visit Mom for her birthday." Grace lifted her swollen eyes. "He threw my car keys away and told me only an ungrateful woman runs around chasing other people on an important day." I believed him. I thought I was really awful. Harold, who had been quietly observing, spoke slowly, without judgment. "That's gaslighting, Grace. He made you believe every problem came from your imagination. That's how an abuser keeps control." Grace clenched her hands tightly. "I know. I changed. I wasn't myself anymore. But I didn't know how to get out." I knelt in front of her and lifted her hands. That's when I saw the faint purple bruise on her left wrist. Deep, unmistakable. "Grace." I froze. "Did he do this?" Grace immediately hid her hand, like someone trained to protect the person who harmed them. No. I did it myself." But her voice trembled, weak and ashamed. Troy, who had seen this too many times, shook his head. "You don't need to protect him here, Grace. We know where that mark came from." Grace broke into sobs, broken, abandoned, childlike cries. He only hit me when I talked back, never where people could see, never hard, just to remind me how to behave." I wrapped my arms around her as my tears fell into her hair. "Oh my God, Grace. How did you endure all this without me knowing?" Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder, not to stop my tears, but to steady me. "Caroline, you are not to blame. Men like Landon hide their violence well. They build a perfect image for the world and show their true face only behind closed doors. You could be the most loving, attentive mother, but you cannot see what they make sure you never see." Then Evelyn turned to Grace, her voice firm. "What happened to you is abuse, not love, not protection, not care, but control, erasing and breaking you." Grace sobbed, clutching her head. I think I've been brainwashed," she whispered. "Every thought in my head is his. I don't even know who I am anymore." Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. "That's something many survivors face, but you're doing the most important thing. You stepped out of that environment, and every passing minute, you are coming back to yourself, piece by piece." Grace rested her head on my shoulder, her eyes heavy. I stroked her hair, feeling her body slowly relax, for the first time since we'd found her. Within minutes, she drifted off to sleep, her breathing still shaky, but no longer terrified by every rustle outside. I looked at her thin, exhausted face, and a deep pain filled my chest, but there was also a tiny flicker, a flicker of hope. because for the first time after years inside that dark box of control, Grace had stepped 1 foot out of it, and I would do anything to help her step out with the other. The second night at Troy's ranch carried an eerie stillness. A stillness that wasn't peaceful at all. It felt like a lake before a storm, unmoving, cold, and ready to shatter at the slightest tremor. Grace had fallen asleep early, drained after the emotional unraveling with Evelyn. But I, despite the burning in my eyes, couldn't close mine. I sat on the porch, staring at the darkness spreading across the hills, my heart tightening with the sense that things would get worse before they got better. And I was right. Near midnight, Troy received a message from someone in his old department. A guard from the gated community who saw Landon every day. He went to her cousin's house, yelled at the neighbors, showed photos. Troy, read it, then turned to me, his face darkening like the night swallowing the moonlight. I'm so sorry, Caroline. But he's reached Santa Fe. It felt like someone squeezed my chest with both hands. Is my sister okay? Yes. He didn't touch anyone, but he shouted, questioned neighbors, claimed you kidnapped an adult, that Grace is mentally unstable, showed them pictures of you both. And according to the guard, he looked completely unhinged. I closed my eyes, feeling myself sink into a cold abyss. Grace heard my shaky breath and sat up abruptly, still half asleep. Mom. What happened? Troy didn't hide it. He crouched down so she could see his face. Landon made it to Santa Fe, but everyone is safe. He's just hunting for clues. Grace clutched the blanket, her breathing fractured. He won't stop. Mom, I know him. He'll come here. Evelyn pulled her close, rubbing her back. We're prepared. Tomorrow, when the FBI office opens, we'll file everything. After that, he can't touch you. Tomorrow, Grace whispered, but there was no faith in her voice. That's tomorrow, but what about tonight? Tonight. Tonight was the word that silenced the whole room, because tonight no one knew where Landon was. No one knew how close he might be. No one knew if he had already found a trail. Troy stood, locking every door, pulling curtains tight, checking each window. He placed a heavy flashlight near the bed and took down his father's old hunting rifle from the wall. Just in case, he said, voice low, I pray we won't need it. The house grew thick with tension, a tension so sharp it felt like one wrong breath could break it. When Evelyn tucked Grace back into bed, I sat beside her, holding her hand as she drifted into uneasy sleep, jerking awake at the smallest noise. I held her hand as if letting go would make her disappear. Around 3 a.m, the hour humans are weakest, the hour fear becomes most real, I heard the first sound, a tiny one. But not the wind. Not the wooden frame settling. It was the soft, unmistakable tap of someone touching glass. I shot upright, heart slamming into my ribs. I thought I imagined it, but then, crack! Glass shattered from the living room. I leapt to my feet. Grace, stay here, I shouted, running through the hallway. But Troy was already ahead of me, rifle in hand. Stay behind me, he barked. I ran anyway. I couldn't think of anything but Grace. Troy flipped on the living room light, and I saw him, Landon. He stood in the center of the room, his face twisted beyond recognition, his eyes bloodshot like someone who hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, dirt smeared on his sleeves. He must have pushed through bushes or fences to break in. His expression wasn't human anymore. It was obsession, ownership, madness. When he saw me, only me, his eyes ignited. Caroline, he growled. Give me back my wife, or all of you will pay. Troy raised the gun. Don't move, one more step and I shoot. Landon laughed, a sound so cold it chilled my spine. You think you scare me? I didn't come alone. And at that moment, headlights blasted through the windows, harsh, blinding white. At least 2 cars. Figures stood behind the lights, silhouettes impossible to identify. Landon's eyes gleamed with mania. She belongs to me. I'm taking her, and none of you can stop me. I tried to run to the bedroom, but before I could, no, Mom. Grace stood in the hallway. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't hide behind me. She simply stood there, trembling but upright, facing the man who had shattered her spirit. Landon froze. Grace. Sweetheart. His voice flipped instantly from deranged to sugary poison. They lied to you. You don't understand. Just come back and we'll fix everything. You just need to sign a few things. I'm doing all of this for you. Grace inhaled deeply. Her voice shook, but it was clear. No, I'm not going with you. The air in the house detonated. Landon roared, You're mine. You promised you'd always stay with me. Evelyn stepped forward, calm as ice. She's not your property. Troy tightened his grip on the trigger. Harold shielded Grace with his body, and I could only stare at my daughter, trembling but standing tall, facing the man who once held her mind in his hands. Grace, Landon snarled, you don't understand how dangerous this is. You only have to listen to me. No, Grace said again, louder. You're not someone who loves me. You're someone who wants to own me. I saw her knees weaken slightly, but she didn't fall. Grace was fighting the thing that had controlled her every day, and she was winning, even if just barely. Landon screamed, his voice slicing through the room. If you don't come with me, then no one in this house is leaving alive. Troy immediately stepped forward. Try it. Outside, the car lights shifted, and the shadows of the figures moved with them. Landon looked toward the window, then back at us, like a cornered animal. And I knew. This confrontation was only the beginning. One wrong move, and there would be blood. I held Grace's hand from behind, gripping it tightly, as if trying to give her strength I wasn't even sure I still had. The standoff among the 3 of us, me, my daughter, and the man who once controlled her life, had gone past the point of return. And I understood that tonight could determine the fate of my entire family. I had never known a moment that could feel both endless and as brief as a single breath, until the police burst into the ranch house in the middle of our confrontation with Landon. Everything happened too fast. Flashlight beams cutting through the windows, heavy footsteps on the ground, and shouts of, "Police! Open up!" echoing through the cramped space. Troy didn't even have time to speak before the door flew open. 3 fully equipped officers stepped inside, one holding a flashlight, another raising a hand in a controlling gesture. They swept the light across the living room and stopped when they saw Landon standing close to Grace and me. "Hands down and step back," one officer shouted. But Landon, instead of fear, his face changed instantly. His voice turned soft as silk, dripping with the kind of deceit I had known all too well. "Thank God you're here." He pointed straight at me. "She kidnapped my wife. Grace is in an unstable mental state. I'm afraid she might harm herself." My heart clenched, as if someone had crushed it with their fist. All week I had prepared myself for countless possibilities, but not this. Landon had made the move before we did. He called the police, and he had already scripted the entire story. An officer turned to me. "Are you Caroline Mercer?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady even though my legs were shaking. "We received a report that you forcibly detained an adult against her will and caused her emotional distress." I opened my mouth to explain, but Landon immediately cut in, as if he had memorized his lines. "She's been manipulating her daughter, filling her head with lies that I'm hurting her. I have medical records proving Grace has had episodes of instability. I'm only here to take her home." I felt frozen. Harold stepped forward but was blocked by an officer. Evelyn squeezed my hand gently, reminding me not to react emotionally. But in that moment, Landon's wall of lies seemed as tall as a mountain, while my truth felt like a petal caught in the wind. An officer turned to Grace. "Ms. Grace, do you want to leave with your husband?" Grace didn't move. Just hours ago, she had trembled at the sound of his name. Now that question pierced right into her deepest fear. Landon took one step, pretending to care about her. "Come on, sweetheart, come home with me. Everything will be okay." Grace stepped back, only slightly, but enough to make Landon stiffen. "Ms. Grace," the officer repeated, "are you being held here against your will?" The air thickened. I felt the whole room tilt. If Grace didn't speak, the police would believe Landon. He had a story, fake documents, and that polished, gentle exterior he had cultivated for years. My knees almost buckled when I saw Grace lower her head, her shoulders shaking. "Grace," I whispered softly, not begging, not pushing, just calling my daughter the way I did when she was little, when she needed to know her mother was still there. Grace lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red, but no longer empty. Something inside her had shifted. A small, bright piece of courage strong enough to push back against the darkness that had swallowed her for 2 years. And in a voice weak but clear, Grace said, "I want to file a report." No one moved for several seconds. Even the officers were stunned. Landon let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Grace, you're being coerced." Grace raised her hand, stopping him. "I am not kidnapped. I left because I was threatened. I want to file a report for abuse." An officer stepped closer. "Do you have any evidence?" Grace looked at me. I nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart. The truth has been waiting to be spoken." Grace opened the cloth bag Rosa had given her. Her hands still trembled, but she placed each item on the table, like she was laying down the foundation of her freedom. This is the audio recording, where he talks about creating an accident for my mother. These are photos of property documents with forged signatures of me and my mom. This is a message I never sent, but has my name on it. The officers leaned in. Their expressions shifted from suspicion to confusion to realization. Harold added gently, "All of these are time-stamped properly. We'll provide full originals first thing in the morning." Grace still wasn't done. She pulled up her sleeve. Bruises, the deep purple marks Landon had left, were exposed under the light. One officer murmured, "My God." Those bruises, they needed no explanation. They spoke every truth Grace had been forced to swallow. Landon's expression twisted. He stepped back, his mouth opening as if scrambling for excuses. She did that herself. But no one believed him anymore. An officer looked at him, cold as steel. "Landon Whitmore, you're coming with us for questioning." Landon snapped. He lunged at Grace. "You belong to me. You can't." Troy rushed forward, but the officers were faster. They pinned Landon to the floor, twisting his arms behind him as he screamed, "Grace, you'll pay for this. All of you will." The click of the handcuffs echoed sharply, a cold, final sound. enough to make Grace burst into tears. The police let him out. The flashing lights from the patrol car cut across the wooden walls, glinting off the tears on Grace's face like broken moonlight. When the door shut, when the engines faded, when silence returned, Grace collapsed in front of me. I thought I was going to die in that house, she whispered, each word rising from years of swallowed fear. Mom, if you hadn't come, I don't think I'd still be alive. I pulled her into my arms, holding her as tightly as I could, wishing I could mend every wound she had endured in the darkness. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking. You survived. You did. You're stronger than you think. Evelyn stepped beside us and placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. This is the first step, and it's the hardest one. Grace held my hand, and for the first time, it didn't tremble. In that moment, I knew that my daughter, the girl I thought I had lost to control, fear, and lies, was finding her way back. Not because of a miracle, but because she had reclaimed something that had been stolen from her, her voice. I once believed that the moment the police handcuffed Landon and took him out of the ranch would be the end of that nightmare. But as Harold had warned earlier, justice doesn't come overnight, Caroline. Especially when the enemy is someone who knows how to hide his crimes and manipulate emotions. And he was right. Just 3 days after the break-in, Landon's lawyer filed for bail. I wanted to object, to scream that he would continue threatening us. But the legal system doesn't run on emotions. It runs on procedure. He was granted bail with conditions, a substantial bond and a restraining order. Grace panicked when she heard. He'll find me, she whispered, trembling, and I held her close, listening to her heartbeat pounding in terror. Troy reassured her. He made a critical mistake breaking in. Our case is solid. The moment he violates the restraining order, he's back in jail. But fear doesn't disappear because someone says so. It needs time. And Grace needed more time than anyone could imagine. In the following days, we left the ranch, not by choice, but out of necessity. We chose Portland, far enough, quiet enough, and full of support services for survivors of domestic abuse. When the car passed the Welcome to Portland sign, I glanced at Grace. She sat by the window, her eyes still darkened with exhaustion, but her face looked less tense, as if she had walked out of a long tunnel, and this was the first light she had seen in years. Evelyn moved to Portland a few weeks later to continue therapy. I knew that wasn't something every doctor would do, and I was deeply grateful. The first session took place in our small living room, sunlight pouring onto Grace's face, highlighting the faint bruises still lingering. "How are you feeling today?" Evelyn asked softly. Grace smiled, a small, fragile smile. "I don't know. Some days, I think I'm okay. But then I hear footsteps in the hallway and I can't breathe." Evelyn nodded. "That's trauma. Very common. You lived in fear too long. Your brain needs time to understand you're safe." Grace stared at her hands. "I feel guilty for trusting the wrong person, for leaving Mom, for not seeing the truth." I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her nothing was her fault, but Evelyn held my gaze. This was something Grace needed to walk through herself. "Grace," Evelyn said, "victims of coercive control never know they're victims while they're in it. You weren't weak. You were isolated, made to doubt yourself. No one is strong enough to resist that alone." Grace lifted her eyes, tears falling freely for the first time without wiping them away. "I want to believe that." I held her hand. "You're not weak, Grace. You're a survivor." She broke into tears, not the terrified kind, but the relieved kind. While Grace healed, Harold kept digging. When he laid a thick stack of papers in front of me, my breath caught. Caroline, this wasn't just about Grace. The file was packed with evidence of Landon's involvement in shady transfers, forged property documents, and hidden debts. Grace wasn't targeted because she was naive. She was targeted because she had legal value he wanted to exploit. So that means, I whispered. It means, Harold said gravely, Grace wasn't foolish. She was systematically groomed. After he left, I stared out at Portland's gray sky. Light rain began to fall, and for the first time in months, I felt something lift off my chest. Grace hadn't failed. She had survived something designed to break her completely. In the weeks that followed, I saw her change, piece by piece. The first time she laughed at a cat video. The first time she went grocery shopping without checking behind her. The first time she finished a plate of pasta without worrying he would call her fat. The first time she slept 7 hours. Real sleep, not jolting awake from nightmares. And the first time she looked at me and smiled softly, "Mom, I think I'm going to be okay." I turned away so she wouldn't see my tears. I had once believed I'd lost her forever, swallowed by manipulation and fear. But truth remained where lies had tried to bury it. Maternal love doesn't disappear because someone hides it. It only gets covered, and slowly we brushed the dust away. But while we healed, Landon kept making mistakes. He sent anonymous messages to Grace, called from unknown numbers, watched her from outside a therapy office. Even with the restraining order, he kept violating it. And that sent him back to jail. When the police informed us, Grace exhaled like she had dropped a stone she'd carried for years. I held her, whispering, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." But she and I knew fear doesn't evaporate instantly. It melts slowly, like ice under spring sun, and someday it would be only a memory. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset turn the Willamette River red, Grace whispered, "Mom, if you hadn't come for me, I don't think I'd still be alive to see this sky." I squeezed her hand. "You saved yourself when you said no. I only walked beside you." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Mom, am I ready for the trial?" The wind brushed past us, carrying the scent of the river and the quiet of evening. I looked at the daughter who had once been shattered and was now slowly standing tall again, and I knew the final battle still awaited us. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We're ready." We didn't know how long the trial would last. We didn't know what Landon would try next. We didn't know where this would take our family. But we knew one thing. This would be the biggest battle, and the last one. On the first morning of the trial, Portland was wrapped in a thin layer of fog. The sky was gray without a hint of sunlight, but somehow it felt fitting for the moment we were about to face, the moment that would end years of manipulation, threats, and fear. Grace held my hand as we climbed the steps of the federal courthouse. Her hand still trembled, but it was no longer the desperate trembling from before. It was the trembling of someone about to walk into her final confrontation. One fought in public, before dozens of eyes, before the law, and before the man who once held her captive through invisible chains. Troy and Evelyn walked behind us. Harold waited at the entrance, holding the black case that contained all the evidence against Landon. "If justice had a face today," Harold said as he opened the door, "I believe it would be named Grace Mercer." Grace swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and nodded. The courtroom was large but suffocating. On the left sat our side, me, Grace, Harold, and our support team. On the right was Landon and his attorney. I looked at him. Landon appeared in his familiar gray suit, his tie straightened, his hair neatly slicked back. If someone didn't know the truth, anyone could believe he was a successful man here to resolve a small financial dispute. But I knew better than anyone that neatness was only a facade. He sat down at the defendant's table, looking around the courtroom as if this were his stage. And then, when his eyes landed on Grace, he gave a small smile. A smile that was arrogant, taunting, and chilling. Grace stiffened. I squeezed her hand tightly. "Don't look at him. Look at me." Grace turned to me, and in her eyes I saw both fear and determination. The hearing began. The judge, a silver-haired woman whose face suggested she had witnessed many family tragedies, asked each side to present their case. Landon's attorney stood first. His voice was smooth, practiced, and clearly rehearsed many times. "Your Honor, my client is the victim of a long misunderstanding. His wife, Ms. Grace, has shown signs of mental instability over the past year. Her mother, Mrs. Carolyn, removed her from the home against her will, causing her to panic. Several bruises thought to be from abuse were actually self-inflicted due to emotional dysregulation." Grace bowed her head. I saw her shoulders tremble. But Evelyn gently touched her back. "Breathe, Grace. You only need to inhale and exhale." When Harold rose, his voice was calm but razor-sharp. "Your Honor, we will begin with the financial evidence." He took out 3 thick folders, each marked with colored tabs. "This is proof that Landon Whitmore forged transfer documents for 3 properties owned by Grace and her mother, with the intent to seize their assets. All signatures have been inspected and confirmed as fraudulent." He held up each page. The signatures were stretched unnaturally. The handwriting of Grace leaned too far to the right. Clearly forged, but sophisticated enough to fool most people. Next, Harold played the audio recording, the one Rosa captured while eavesdropping behind the door as Landon talked about a fall-down-the-stairs accident meant for me. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's brows knitted. Landon's attorney tried to interject. "That could have been a joke." "Try joking about getting rid of your mother-in-law in front of a judge," Harold replied, his voice so cold that the courtroom paused for several seconds. Then it was Grace's turn. Grace stood. I heard the soft scrape of the chair, a tiny sound, but loud enough to make me want to hold her all over again. She walked to the witness stand, each step heavy as if carrying a year's worth of fear with her. When she reached the stand, I could see her hands gripping the sides of the chair. "Miss Grace," the judge asked, "are you ready to testify?" Grace nodded. "Yes, I am." The first sentence wavered, but as she continued, her voice grew clearer, steadier. "Landon is not the person he presents here. I lived with him for over 2 years, and in those 2 years, I went through cycles most people never see. It started with sweetness, with care. Then it turned into control." The whole room went silent. No whisper, no shifting of chairs. Grace swallowed hard and continued. "He controlled what I ate, what I wore. He told me I was fat, made me diet until some nights I could barely stand. He took my phone every night, read every message, deleted my friends, forbade me from seeing my mother." Her voice caught. I placed a hand over my heart to keep it from exploding. "Then came the punishments," Grace said, softer now. "He never hit me where anyone could see, only in hidden places. He threatened me if I ever left the house. Then he apologized, brought gifts, and the cycle repeated again." Tears rolled down her cheeks. But this time, she didn't wipe them away. Grace lifted her sleeve. The faint but undeniable bruises appeared under the courtroom lights. A sharp gasp came from someone behind us. Landon's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection! Those bruises!" "Sit down," the judge said, her voice sharp as a blade. "She is testifying." Grace forced herself to steady her voice. "I thought the apologies would change things. I thought he loved me, but he only wanted to control me, seize my assets, eliminate my mother. I lived like someone who had no breath left." She looked at the judge, her voice suddenly strong enough to silence the room again. "The day I ran, if my mother hadn't come for me, I don't think I would be alive to stand here today." That was the moment I lowered my head into my hands and let the tears fall. But I didn't sob, didn't tremble. They were not tears of pain anymore, but tears of someone who had just watched her child return from the edge of a cliff. The judge took a few notes. "Thank you, Miss Grace." Grace walked back to us. I stood, wrapped her in my arms, and felt her heartbeat against my chest. No longer the heartbeat of fear, but of someone who had reclaimed the right to live. When it was time for the verdict, no one in the courtroom held a shred of doubt. The judge read each charge clearly. Landon Whitmore is found guilty of large-scale financial fraud, forgery of legal documents, emotional domestic abuse, issuing threats to life, and violating a restraining order. I looked at him. The arrogance on his face had collapsed into a fear I had never seen in him before. Sentence: 17 years in federal prison with no eligibility for reduction during the first 8 years. His attorney rushed to say something, but Landon stood frozen, his face pale. I didn't look at him again. I looked at Grace. She walked out of the courtroom, her breathing unsteady but her eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years: life. On the courthouse steps, the city wind blew through her hair. Grace lifted her face to the sky, tears rolling but her lips curved into a smile. "Mom," she whispered softly, "I feel like I was born again." I held my daughter tightly, pressing my face into the hair that had once been drenched in tears, but now smelled of freedom. "Not born again, Grace," I whispered. "You were born for real, this time into freedom, into light, into the truth you fought so bravely to reclaim." And in that moment, I knew our story had reached the end of its darkness, and the doorway to a new life had opened wide for both of us. 5 years have passed since the day the trial ended, since the day Grace walked out of those courthouse doors with tears streaming down her face, but with a heart that, for the first time, understood what freedom felt like. 5 years, not long in a lifetime, yet long enough to heal wounds I once feared would stay with her forever. Now every morning I wake up in our little house in North Seattle, open the window to breathe in the crisp air carrying the scent of young pine, and each time I do, I silently thank life for giving us another chance. Grace is the one who has changed the most. Now 34, she works at a support center for domestic abuse survivors. She didn't choose this job out of ambition, but out of gratitude. Grace once told me, "I don't want anyone to spend years realizing they deserve a different life." I watch her when she stands before groups of women who arrive with dark circles under their eyes, slumped shoulders, exhausted gazes. Grace doesn't lecture or preach. She simply tells her story, softly, like she's speaking to a friend, and that sincerity has saved countless lives. My own life changed in ways I never expected. After the trial, I opened a small bookstore on a quiet street near Green Lake. It isn't large, just 2 rooms with old wooden shelves and soft armchairs. But somehow it seems to hold an entire world. Sometimes I host gatherings about domestic abuse, inviting women who have lived stories like ours to sit together, drink tea, and speak of things they never dared to say out loud before. I'm not an expert or a therapist. I'm just a mother who once lost her daughter to darkness and was lucky enough to find her before it was too late. The bookstore gradually became a refuge for wounded souls. Some come just to listen. Some stay to rediscover themselves. Some silently place a book on the counter and cry. And all of them remind me of this simple truth. Surviving isn't just continuing to breathe. It's reclaiming your life after the storm has passed. Rosa lives near us as well. She, the woman who risked everything to warn me that night, has become an irreplaceable part of our family. We often joke that life stitched us into a chosen family, and sometimes the family you choose becomes stronger than the one you're born into. Every weekend we cook together. Rosa always brings her cornbread that she proudly claims is better than the Mexican place down the street. Grace brings a vegetable salad Evelyn taught her to help rebuild healthy eating habits. And I make chicken soup, the dish Grace used to crave but never dared cook in the years she lived with Landon because the smell bothered him. Now we cook it every week as a small symbol of freedom. But healing isn't a straight path. There are nights when Grace jolts awake, sweat soaking her back, her eyes wide as if she were seeing him standing in that ranch house again. But instead of shrinking in fear, Grace calls my name. "Mom, where am I?" And I go to her, kneel by the bed, hold her hand, and say, "You're home. There's no one here." The nightmares have grown fewer with time. The panic spells shorter, and small things like laughing at a movie, slowing down to watch the sunset, or stepping into a clothing store without fearing judgment are quiet victories we celebrate in our own way. We built a new home, not out of wood and brick, but out of peace, respect, and love untouched by fear. A home with no stalking footsteps, no controlling gaze, no threats, just 3 women, my daughter, Rosa, and me, walking out of the past and into a future on steadier legs. One evening on the balcony, watching the sun melt into the horizon, Grace rested her head on my shoulder. The orange glow on her face made her look like a completely new version of herself. Not the old Grace, not the shattered Grace, but the Grace of today, strong, grounded, and free. "Mom," she whispered, "the moment I escaped him, that was the moment I returned to you. I thought I lost you, but really, I lost myself." I held her hand, feeling like I was touching a life she had stitched back together with her own courage. "No, sweetheart," I said. "You never lost me. You were just wandering through a place that was too dark. I only did what mothers do. I went to find you." The sky that day glowed a breathtaking shade of gold. I knew our story had reached its end, not in sorrow, but in hope. The deepest wounds had finally begun to heal. I know I lost many things. The years Grace spent under manipulation, the empty nights without messages, the days wondering whether my daughter was alive in spirit or completely broken. But I also found everything again, my daughter, my family, and myself. And if there is one thing I want to offer anyone listening to our story, it's this. A mother will fight to her very last breath to pull her child out of the abyss. Not out of obligation, not out of duty, but because love never gives up. Thank you. Yes, you, for staying with me until the end of this story. Where are you watching from in America or anywhere in the world? I would love to hear your voice, feel your heart, and know whether our journey touched a corner of your own life. If you felt a pain like ours, please remember, you are not alone. You deserve peace. You deserve a love that does not hurt you. Share with me in the comments. Every story you tell could become a lifeline for someone still sinking in silence. And if you want to walk with me through more stories of healing, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like. Not just to support us, but to let me know there are hearts out there walking beside me as we keep lighting the way forward. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for your patience, your empathy, and for becoming part of the light that helped my daughter and me step out of the darkness. I hope to see you again on the next journey.